All right, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Nick Dinsmore, and I am super excited to welcome everybody to episode 5 of Beer and Broadband. And it is Beer and Broadband for a reason, because we have beer and it is Halloween. So actually I have pumpkin beer, and we're very excited to talk about education. So with that, I'm going to kick it off and turn it over to our host, the CEO of Bonfire, Mr. Brian Hollister, to take it away.
Well, thanks everyone. I'm so glad to be here with everyone today. So we've got a really exciting topic today, combining both beer, broadband, and now education. Lots of things happening in that space. So I think we're going to have a colorful conversation today about a lot of topics or a lot of impacts associated with how both broadband is enabling a lot of new things, and also obviously can be a challenge to a lot of folks. And we'll specifically focus on education today. So today, like Nick said, I'm your host. I'm with Bonfire and help lead our team. And our goal in life is really to help communities, service providers come together. And really, at the end of the day, we're focused on trying to do whatever we can to bring affordable broadband access to every American out there. So we do whatever we can to help bring the community together. And ultimately what we provide is a turnkey solution to help build these networks. But today we have a great panelist that we've assembled today. We've got Brian Worthen, CEO of Visionary Broadband and Mammoth Networks. We've got Libby Bryan. Libby is the principal of Denver School in Science and Technology, which is a chartered program that's part of the Denver public school system. And she's a principal and managing 15 different schools. And then we have Dr. Dave Cleary, who is also a part of Bonfire. And Dr. Dave is our Chief Product Officer and CTO. We're excited to have you a part of this. And Dennis Pappas, who is the Director of Fiber at LPC NextLight, which is a network that has been built in Longmont, Colorado. So I'm really excited to have all of you here today. And as always, we try to, this is not about a sales pitch. This is about really us coming together as folks in the industry that really care about making an impact, and broadband is what's bringing us all together today. And of course, we'll focus on education. But first and foremost, let's make sure everyone's got a proper cocktail in hand. And today I am focusing on, since we've got a little bit of a theme with Halloween, I have my guest in the background. This is Skeletor. We are excited about having you on the panelist. I forgot to introduce him, but now he's getting introduced. And I've got a Night Owl Pumpkin Ale to go along with our little Halloween theme today. So what do you have, Mr. Dinsmore?
We have the Tommy Knocker Pumpkin Ale as well, already poured into the glass and preparing already to have a great conversation.
Nice. Dr. Dave, what do you have in hand?
Well, I've got a brown ale, and for later in the show, I've got a Dirty Bastard.
We definitely will hold that to later in the show, for sure.
Maybe that should be the higher education versus primary education.
Dennis, what are you drinking today?
My palate's not as sophisticated as you others are, so I've disguised my beer in a mug, and it's a Bud Light.
Nice. Smooth operator, of course. And Mr. Worthen, what do we have today?
I'm grounded. I have nothing.
What? Nothing.
I can't do for work. I'm just running ragged. You get what you get.
Worthen, we're going to work on this. Next time we'll have something FedExed and have it ready for you. You're working way too hard, but you have a lot of really great things going on. So love to hear more about it in today's episode. All right. Well, with that, let's get kicked off.
You didn't ask Libby?
Oh, Libby! Sorry, I skipped over
I happen
you.
to be 8 months pregnant, so I'm going the hydrated route today, and I'm with you in spirit, and I will enjoy a beer in about a month and a half.
A month and a half. Well, congratulations, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm so sorry for skipping you when I learned about that huge introduction too with your name. So, well, let's get started, Mr. Dinsmore. So I think today we were kind of kicking off some things, and you had some various topics, so we wanted to.
We do. So let's actually, so I'm going to hit one stat, and then let's actually make sure we do quick introductions for everybody so everybody knows what people do. So just as a there's been a lot of news about education, a lot of news about broadband given this year. One of the stats from the World Economic Forum said that over 55 million K through 12 students did not receive in-person instruction this year. That's mind-blowing. Like, I mean, because of COVID, the fact that, the impact of this and changing the way education is done is dramatic. So we have a lot of topics to talk about, from education, and for those with and without, from what's important, what's not. But first, let's make sure we know who everybody is. So let's go around the room. Libby, and we'll start with Libby. We've got a Dr. Dave, got a Dennis, and then Brian. Introduce yourself, who you are and what you do, and then we're going to dive right into it.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. So my name's Libby Bryan. I have been in the education scene for about almost 15 years now, working mostly in the Denver metro area. I currently work for DSST Public Schools, which is a charter management organization that is part of the Denver Public Schools umbrella. So as an organization, we have about 15 middle and high schools across the Denver area. And I am the principal at one of our campuses, which is located in Southwest Denver and is our College View Middle School campus. So thank you guys for having me today.
Awesome. Dr. Dave.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dave Cleary, also known as Dr. Dave for fun. I'm a Chief Product Officer for Bonfire, also the Chief Technology Officer. I've got 20 years experience in telecom and was on the ground floor developing GPON standard. And my shtick has been, if you guys know me, educating people on technology. So this is kind of a subject near and dear to my heart.
And Dr. Dave,
and for those, since he's not mentioning it, he is actually a professor. He has a PhD, so the doctor is appropriate.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Pappas.
Good evening. Thanks for the invite. Appreciate it. Dennis Pappas. I'm the fiber director for the city of Longmont, their LPC operation, which is called NextLight. We provide broadband services, fiber-based services to about 22,500 homes in the city of Longmont, Colorado. I've been in the telecommunication industry for about 42 years now.
Is that all? That's it?
I know I don't look near that old. So.
I mean, yeah, that's
it's the Bud Light, actually. So.
Touche.
I mean, you could look like Skeletor behind Brian,
Exactly.
So. I will in a few years.
All right, and last but certainly not least, Mr. Brian Worthen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Worthen from Mammoth Networks and Visionary Broadband, and I'm the Ed McMahon of this show. And I think I've earned this spot unofficially because of all the broadband we've been working on in the Rockies. So we've been rather busy and just finished up Project Thor in Northwest Colorado and doing a lot of stuff to help with students right now in education. So it's a very timely topic and it's very important. I just finished up parent-teacher conferences for my youngest, and I was informed that the teachers had laid out or had been asked by the district not to make have too much homework or produce too much activity in the beginning of COVID at the last school year because of the technology limitations and because not everyone had broadband. So that was something I just learned in the last week. It was really an interesting discussion, and they're already talking at the district about how to combat this year as things get a little crazy.
Well, welcome everybody. So I guess as we start, can we agree fundamentally that America, and this is actually a title of one of the articles, that is America was not prepared for everybody to go online for education? We agree with that?
Would agree.
Yes.
Nobody was prepared to be able, from a broadband perspective, to move entirely online. And obviously, from primary education to even higher education, that gap is massive. So I think one of the things we really want to dive into is, from an education perspective, what does broadband change for people? And obviously, when you think about online learning and education, what are the differences for the people that have broadband versus don't? And I think just kind of laying the context for this discussion. So as we get into it, everybody's clear. So think about like, hey, like right now we're on a video call. Can people that don't have broadband, you're not doing a video call. So let's maybe just, what are the things you guys think of when you think about the inequities of between broadband and no broadband in education?
I think a lot of it, Nick, is the fact that you can either study from the comfort of your own home or you can study from a park bench. Where we have some wireless hotspots that we set up in some of the community parks around Longmont, so that students could go there in the warmer months and do their studying online, out at a picnic table. So I think that's really one of the advantages for those that have it and those that don't.
Libby, what are you saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a school standpoint, it's pretty visible the inequities that lie in terms of access to strong internet in our schools, and I think that's always been true. And I think there's been like tremendous work done in our city and in our state since then. But working with a population that's largely students of color, I think it's clear that there is a lack of access or less access for students and families of color. And that has certainly provided a limitation as we've transitioned very quickly. So I know as we made the transition this past spring, our very first part of our work was really around ensuring 100% of our students had access to working technology and to internet. And I think I was impressed with how quickly we were able to close that gap.
Libby, what were some of the things that you guys were able to do? Because I mean, what's interesting is a lot of your schools are in the metro. Brian and I have a lot of conversations about getting access in rural parts of Colorado and Wyoming and other states. I'm curious to, what were some of the things that you guys were able to do inside the metro? Because it's not just having just the access, it's being able to afford it, right?
Yeah, being able to afford it, being in a stable living situation where you can set up internet and have it on a daily basis or throughout the day. But what we really, the first step was really understanding the needs of everybody in our community, and that in itself took a lot of work to reach out to all families and ensure that we really understood what they were working with. And from there, we supported families in applying for support that would help get them internet access. A lot of families are non-English speaking, so even just supporting them through the challenges of working with service providers who don't speak their home language. And then, providing, we also came to a point where we were just plain up providing hotspots and things like that for families that needed it so that kids could access their coursework as soon as possible. And we ended up being able to accomplish that pretty quick, which obviously helped put everybody at an even playing field as we started remote learning.
I want to go back to a comment Brian made kind of in the introduction around, I guess for the folks in the listening, to this later, let's talk about what are the elements to actually doing education remotely. And I think, I don't have children, so I don't have that issue, but I think trying to be clear on what do you actually need to have to be able to do remote learning and education today? Like laptops, iPads, broadband, I don't actually know. So what are the things that students have to have in order to be successful today in a remote education environment?
I would say yes, yes, and yes. They need all of the above. We're fortunate enough to have a fiber optic connection all the way to our home. But then sometimes there's a laptop issue. As we all know, things pop up, that all of a sudden an 11-year-old can't figure out by himself. And next thing you know, he's looking for backup and he's looking for the iPad and then jump on that call. So it's really been interesting to watch my children be resourceful as they start to get the typical issues that anyone runs into, even when they have broadband, right? Then it's devices and switching from one platform, to another. So, and then I think about, children that might not have all of those tools or finally just getting maybe that single point of access and, being that single point of failure too, right? And we're very lucky that they have options. Our kids have options.
Yeah, and even if they have broadband, what varies from family to family is kind of the digital literacy. How well a family, either the student or the parent, can solve problems. And Libby, I didn't mention this before. My daughter is 8th grade science teacher at a suburb of Minneapolis. And so I've heard a lot of stories from there, and yeah, it's interesting, and it's a lot of work. Kind of the one nice thing is this semester is going much more smoothly than the first or last the spring semester earlier this year, but that still is an issue.
What are you seeing, I guess, Libby, from an education perspective or a school perspective? Like, are you seeing where you need to be able to provide laptops, you need to provide equipment outside of the broadband, right? Because the broadband's the infrastructure, right? It's the enabler. You need the devices, or, is that an issue? Or even Brian Worthen, like, are you seeing from a service provider perspective, people saying, hey, I need help, I need devices on top of the broadband?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we ended up providing devices to all of our students and families, really just to ensure that our kids are using the same technology. Because when you think about, even middle school and high school age children who have not yet worked in a remote space, they're learning all sorts of different tools and platforms that they've never used before. And so, being able to work from the same device has just been critical in terms of building up routines and procedures for students. And, I think in terms of younger students, which I don't work with, but, clearly our youngest students in our city have had the hardest time with remote learning, because as you can imagine, I have a kindergarten age daughter, and engaging with remote learning in kindergarten, it looks much different than even a 6th or 7th grader. And so, yeah, there's just, I think, lots of layers to the inequities and the challenges of remote learning that, we've really been learning about as we go.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I also think about what Brian Hollister said about the age of kids and how to help them. As a provider, we are expected to support a number of devices in the home. And we're actually seeing an uptick in people that lease our managed modem or managed router, because we actually help people with their devices. But that's the key, is the usability of devices, because how do you walk a 3rd grader through uploading their information to the cloud? Or how do you walk a parent through how to get an iPad working, or Zoom on an iPad, or the Google Hangouts or Google Meet, right? The technology is almost overwhelming because there's too many options. And I think what's interesting as a provider, and what we've seen, is there's a certain portion of the population that's really tried to solve their broadband problem by using Wi-Fi on their cellular devices. And so coming into the COVID environment and this pandemic, there's a group of students that were solely relying on a Wi-Fi hotspot. Well, what happens when you try to Zoom over that, which requires a certain amount of upload, and that's a huge issue. And if they're on an unlimited plan, they're being throttled. But conversely, as Libby said, that's the easiest thing to deploy. So you can go out and buy a bunch of hotspots and set those up and easily deploy that, versus having the pain of ordering broadband through a provider like myself and getting on a schedule and meeting a technician. And so it's about speed, it's about usability. It's the difference between, like 10 years ago, what people would have said, hey, there's a Mac environment and there's a PC environment, and one's a little easier. I don't know if there's any easy solution for students right now. And in a classroom environment, teachers have a controlled environment. Everybody's on a similar device. They've already planned it out. They've already, they've already poked holes in it, and they have someone at the school district to support them. When that all moves home, it's the responsibility of the teachers and the student, and it's a big responsibility. And all those things rolled up in one is the education problem for broadband.
Well, it's the students, it's the teachers, and the parents, right? I mean, I can't tell you all the new things I've had to learn that are very specific to how the school wants, their standards implemented, right? For uploading coursework, this, that, next thing. And guess what? It's not a lot of the things that we utilize today. I mean, about the only common thing is the Zoom platform, right? So there's been a lot of learning on our side. So I think there's heightened anxiety across the board with just learning so many new things at one time.
Well, and I think knowing that, at the core of our mission is serving every single student, and you have some students whose parents are with them all day long and able to support them with not only technology, but their coursework. And you have other students who are potentially, babysitting or taking care of younger siblings. And so just being able to support the needs of students from their home environment has been increasingly complex as well.
And what do you do when you're on a technology that doesn't have enough upload for the whole house? So there's someone earning an income in the home, and then there's a student. What takes priority? If you're on a DSL platform and it only has 3 meg upload, and there's 3 people wanting to make be on a Zoom call or participate in a classroom or participate in work, who goes first?
It's a great point. And it also, I mean, it goes back to I guess, a little bit of the inequities, right? Like if somebody has, if you're having to do work from home versus you're not having to work, and you can spend the time helping your student, or your child, but at the same time, like, if you have to do both, what suffers, right? And how do you actually learn that? What are some, I guess on that note, like let's talk about some things that we've seen just in the last 7 months in this space that, what's worked and what's been like, hey, this has just not worked at all from trying to drive and support education. I mean, Dennis, you mentioned, this is actually, you say the Wi-Fi, going to the park bench, and in some ways that's amazing and very altruistic for Longmont to do. But at the same time, like, it's actually kind of sad, right? Like, it's sad that a student has to go to a park bench. It's kind of heartbreaking that that's where they have to go to get broadband to do education.
It is, and it's because of the cost of the service, right? I mean, one thing we didn't talk about in the last, 3 or 4 minutes was the cost. For some families, they can't afford to do it. And so what we've done is we have an income qualified program that we've got about 525 parents and students that are on it. It's a 25 meg service for $14.95 a month.
Nice.
So we try to get something out there, since the network was built by bonds issued from the community, right? We try to get something out there that the members of the community can enjoy at an affordable price. And so I think that did a little bit as the weather got a little worse, to get the kids out of the park and back in their homes, because they could afford to have the services installed. And as Brian was talking about, we do the same thing, right? We lease the modems out, we lease the routers out. And then we have a team of 6 technical service reps that spend their entire days and evenings on the phone with customers, talking to them, how to wire, how to do home networking, and how to make sure all their devices work well with the NextLight equipment that we have in their homes. So it's a combination of multiple things. It's just never one answer or one solution to the problem.
It's a good point about the cost. I mean, I think the latest number I saw stat was that, the average cost is, I think, $60 a month for internet service, which, again, depending on what your job is, I mean, $60 a month is not a lot, and $60 a month is the difference between putting food on the table, right? And putting gas in the car. So I guess, you obviously mentioned programs that you can help families do that. I'm just, from a school system perspective, Libby, you also mentioned, trying to do programs. Are any of you guys seeing more, I guess, community programs trying to help the lower income communities? Because clearly they are, and as Brian said, it's not just rural communities. It's all communities that have lower income that are being impacted.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as we moved into the pandemic in the spring, it felt, from my perspective at least, that a lot of companies were starting to really open up programs and support families with a variety of needs, which was awesome. And I know that our state used about $2 million to partner with T-Mobile earlier this fall to provide hotspots to different families across our state. So those are a couple of things that I know have had a huge impact for my school community, for sure.
I mean, we've had a fair number of customers who have stepped up and said, we'll just pay a monthly fee for a family. We have over 60 people. It's called Share the Light. We have 60 customers now that have their services paid for by other customers on our network, and they're sponsored by them. So it's a good community effort.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, this is obviously, it's a very serious topic. It's something that definitely is something we're all trying to work with and around. But clearly, there's also been a little humor in some of this working and educating remote. So I'm just curious, as we're about halfway through the midpoint here, like any examples of just some humorous situations that you guys have had personally or heard of that, given the Halloween spirit, that like they've just been epic technology fails in trying to do education remotely.
My favorite with a 16-year-old in the house is hearing how they, on a Zoom call for class, they've all renamed themselves Reconnecting, and then turned off their video, right? And so that seems this seems to be the common prank with kids and their teachers. So I always enjoy that when I hear that.
We've seen an unbelievable amount of creative pranks like that from students that you wouldn't believe. Like students who will take a picture of themselves, make it their background, and then abandon their computer. And from the teacher perspective, it looks like they're still sitting there. So all sorts of creative ways to, avoid and also bring laughs to class for sure.
That's all my son needs to hear there. Thanks, Libby.
I know it goes without saying that it's and I get off children, but just the Zoom epic fails that have happened have been, from bathrooms to people not realizing their camera's on or the sound, they don't understand mute. But it does kind of point to the issue of like, if you're not used to technology. I mean, I used to help my grandmother who was in her 90s try to figure out how to use the internet. And it's like, you forget, because we all are in the business, that this stuff isn't just natural. Like, it's not natural just to be able to understand how technology works. So
no, but I'd like to give a shout out to Grandma Hollister, who's 96, who I sent a Facebook portal device to. I sent this as a Mother's Day present to a lot of the older moms in our family. And she was the only one that got it working by herself. So there is hope there, Nick.
So there is hope. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about really what do you guys think the impact's going to be, right? So we're in almost November. Education has been clearly, I guess, in my view, the silver lining is that there's been a focus of education. The fact that we're talking about it is good. But what do we think that the long-term impact is going to be on students, on families, on working professionals that have honestly probably sacrificed to be able to take care and educate their children when they're not in school every day?
Well, I think it depends, obviously, on a lot of different factors, but I think about the different age groups, right? There's a major impact on, the different ages. My son this year, like Dr. Dave was saying, the school district really has their act together. It's very dialed in. He loves it. One day on, one day remote, and the schedule works out really well. It's very organized, and he's enjoying it. The third grader is getting a little, it's difficult. So luckily she's been at school, but during the first part of the pandemic, she wasn't. And, she would sit at the computer, do a lot of work. And as we both, my wife and I working, thought she was, wow, she's doing so good. She's getting all her work done. She wasn't getting her work done. So, there's that. And then, I think in general speaking, in some ways though, like if you have a certain age child, you're going to be able to get right through it if you've got a great broadband connection and they're of a certain age group where they're somewhat independent. If they don't have that connection and they're younger, I think instead of a digital divide, we're creating a digital chasm. And I think this is going to wreak havoc on some families for years to come. And that's what scares me the most of this entire situation. Because in some ways, we've seen how broadband has had just such a major impact, right, in keeping a lot of this together. And in some families that may already work remote for their job, it's not a huge impact, maybe even business as usual, right? And for others, it's devastating.
And I think as an industry, people have realized how woefully inadequate the broadband coverage is. And it's just not the gaps that we have, but it's just the capacity in the network that we have. I mean, you know, we see our customer base go up by 5 or 6%, but we see the bandwidth they're gobbling up every quarter go up by 10, 18, 22%. I mean, it's staggering just how much is being utilized, and in some areas, just how little is available to the customer base.
So on one side of that coin, Dennis, you're seeing how the consumption is dramatically growing. They're at home, more devices, more needs. The kids are there, right? So you can see what's happening, right? And the need is becoming so great. And then to really think about that, you know, it's like that meter is running on the consumption, and someone else, we can't even get it started.
Well, let's on that note, let's pivot a little bit. Let's geek out, because I know Dr. Dave is can help us with this. I think we a lot of times forget that very point. No, I think we forget the point of the consumption, right? I mean, obviously, Brian and Dennis both, you know, doing what they do, understand, and obviously from Bonfire's engineering perspective, understand what it takes to drive broadband. But I think, you know, understanding the different applications, like what is the impact to a net broadband network, and from both, I guess, a design, support, and just usability when we start using, I mean, Zoom, of course, I mean, I love their stock price because we talk about it all the time, but from Zoom to Teams to, I don't know, Libby, what other programs that schools use, but like now that we're using all these applications, what does that actually technically do to a network? Dave?
Yeah, you know, the video quality, if you're watching a movie that's in the downstream direction, you know, that's several meg up to, you know, 10 or so. And that generally is in place for people who have broadband, just because most people are watching video. But lots of the service plans have a much lower upstream rate. Many have just even 1 meg upstream. And I think kind of a minimum, 1 meg is pretty iffy video. They can rate shape it down, but that's kind of a little bit glitchy. A lot of people, as Dennis mentioned, like a 3 meg upstream is probably fine for one person, but if you get a couple on there, you're hurting. But many of the, you know, the higher tier service plans are really fine for education. You don't need to have real high resolution. But I guess even what I'm seeing, you know, with naming themselves Reconnecting, that a lot of the students will just not have their video on, you know, which is if it's their video in their home and you're seeing it, it's obviously an upstream bandwidth burden on their service at their home. So
I guess but if you think about it, and maybe Mr. Worthen, I mean, think about the difference between fiber and not fiber, DSL, right? Like what, you know, we talk about broadband more generically, but the reality is there's a huge difference between fiber and DSL, right? I mean, the ability, at least the broadband, the speed ability, right?
Yeah, it's dramatic. The fact of the matter is networks right now have been built in a trunk and branch fashion. So every community has a trunk line to it and then branches out to the different subdivisions and businesses and, you know, and whatnot in the area and school. And every one of those points is a choke point. And I don't care if the technology is DSL. Fiber is less susceptible. It's the least amount of susceptibility. Wireless has this, cellular has this, satellite actually has the same kind of issue. Everywhere is a choke point as you get closer to that trunk line. So it's like a big funnel, right? And everybody's contending for that same data. And how do you order when you're looking at moving? So I was in Pagosa Springs, Colorado in April, and talking to a builder, and he said, I've sold these 2 houses and sight unseen. You know, there's people moving from the largest city to Pagosa Springs because because of this COVID environment and whatnot. and they haven't even asked about broadband. So this is my broadband contractor who also does water lines, and he said, can you believe they haven't even asked about broadband? And there's not a lot of options there. And so what's interesting is I don't think people are knocking on the doors or asking the right question of their broadband provider. What everybody does is they shop on price, they shop on advertised speed, and then they have an experience. And the worst or the more horrible the experience is when you set it up, the least likely you are to actually move to another product because you remember the pain you went through. And so look at the limitations of the networks and how they're built, and how larger companies don't worry about how this trunk and branch design works, and things to correct that. That's the real problem is the contention in the network and coax. Within cable networks, DSL, wireless, satellite, it's all an issue. And that's a problem we should be working on right now. I know, like in our case, and I think I've talked about this previously, we spend a huge amount of money on redundancy and extra paths. And we started down this route about 4 or 5 years ago, and we have every community on a redundant path. And that takes away some of that trunk and branch environment, because you can have certain portions of a community going through one node and or one trunk and another trunk and split that. But it comes down to provider responsibility, because everybody's sending their check. What's the provider doing with it? Are they actually engineering it, or are they saying, hey, this is the best it gets? Because if you look at everybody's SLA and everybody's agreement, it buried deep in everyone's, and even ours to some degree, it says, hey, this is best efforts. If you want the bulletproof Cadillac solution, it's going to cost you a different amount. So it's a trial and error thing, and that's what everybody's going through right now, is this trial and error. And we saw a huge migration to our broadband product from DSL during this, and the next phase of that migration is to fiber, but fiber's not available everywhere.
And Dennis, obviously, given what Longmont's doing with Nextlight, clearly fiber is a priority.
Fiber's everywhere, and like Brian said, we've had to increase capacity to keep up with demand. I mean, we were 10 gig links out of the network into Denver and up to Cheyenne, and using 4 different providers to carry that traffic. And now we've upgraded those 10 gig links, one to 100 gig, and another one, all the other 3 to 40 gig links. So you have to keep making the investment in the to handle the capacity and the needs of the community. At the first about month, I think it was right around April 19th or 20th, our demand on the network peaked at 82 gigs. And that was like 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. So we realized at that point, if we were to take an outage on any one of those single links, that we would be in trouble. And so this year we've really worked on on expanding the network and getting more capacity, more paths out, more capacity out of the network, so that we don't have those contention issues should one of the links go down. The others that are there can support it.
And I want to point out, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Dennis is taking the time with his team to actually plan, look at eventualities, not wait for there to be an issue, right? Yeah. So you look at your traffic patterns, you plan ahead, you say, oh, I'm hitting 60% threshold on this circuit, I better upgrade it. And not every provider does that.
Yeah. I guess let's even make it real for this conversation with students, right? Like in that situation, if a link goes down, it's not just affecting, it used to be businesses and homes, and it's, hey, you're out, it's an inconvenience. If it goes down now, you stop learning, right? Learning stops. Like you've stopped the process that now has become the de facto education model, right? Which
everything stops. Everything stops. Everything, right? I mean, absolutely.
Well, and I think from an education standpoint, we were seeing so many inequities and so much change in terms of how much students are learning, that we're really feeling the urgency around every minute counts. And so, one day, half a day, a couple hours really is a big deal in the grand scheme of things. I mean, we had to laugh about it a little bit this week when we had, what would have been a snow day last year, and turned into an online learning day this year. And my teachers were like, the pandemic has even taken our snow days away, right? But we couldn't afford to lose another day. And that's just true, given the loss of learning that's happened and where we're at, every minute counts.
So Libby, I'm curious, with obviously the shift being pushed to home and as we're talking about, it's not just the broadband connection, it's making sure that they can connect and working through the technical issues. Are you and the teachers now having to become, internet geeks like us and helping them become, your IT wizards? I mean, are they, is some of their time and being now spent on helping him through some of those technical challenges versus instruction?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We do. We obviously have staff. I have a staff member at school whose job is around tech support. However, the fastest route to supporting kids is when my teachers and other staff members are able to support in the moment as well. So definitely a lot of tech support happening. I think in particular for our youngest students who struggle more with learning new platforms and who we've never actually gotten to meet in person because they started off the year learning brand new systems. And so, yeah, we've definitely gotten better in the realm of tech support, and we still have a long way to go for sure.
Just wondering, I don't want to call them out, but I'll ask, so Brian and Dennis, have you guys seen an increase in tech support in the last 7 months because of more people trying to figure out how to do this?
Our call volumes into our TSRs is up by probably 30%.
Wow.
And then from our technician standpoint, we're spending a lot more time on a customer's premise because we're helping them set up their networking when we put in the tap box and the ONTs. So yeah, the demand has been, it's been incredible, and it's caused, it's driven a lot more work to our technicians and to our technical support staff.
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. We've had to add almost 50% to our tech support staff since March.
Wow.
And it's a high amount. I mean, but we have to be available. We have to be ready for that. We can't just not take that call. It's important.
So let's talk about, we've obviously talked about the impact of this and the changes and what's happening. Let's talk about what are the initiatives that are going on both, federally, state, local, education. What are the initiatives and the creativity that's happening in this area to try to help both with the inequities and honestly just to keep people learning, right? Keep people motivated and driven, because I think we can all agree education is honestly, it's the root of success, right? You need education to be able to thrive. So I've heard a lot of, obviously the park bench, there was the viral story about Taco Bell Wi-Fi's, but what are you guys seeing as far as new initiatives, new ideas, new funding that's helping kind of bring this forward?
Well, from a school standpoint, we're definitely trying to get more creative, right? We've completely shifted how we're using school budgets, knowing that, prioritizing funds for technology and in some cases, providing internet to families that might need it is critical, as well as just new tech platforms and tools that we haven't previously had to make room in our budget for. So we're definitely thinking creatively there. I think I mentioned kind of the state project that provided $2 million for hotspots to students. I've seen several innovative things like that, but yeah, mostly thinking about creative changes at the school level for sure.
I think early on, USAC, who handles the E-rate program, set up some of the rules or loosened them so that the broadband at school districts could be shared outside the building. So there were rules on that prior, and that was loosened. But the problem with that was, and I think there's been some wins with that. And what's happened is some providers have taken fiber out of the school to a neighboring building or a public, community center, or even a school bus and set that up as a hotspot. But it was a temp fix, and not every provider had staff available and time to actually work on that. It's not like people were waiting in the wings saying, "All right, we're waiting for a pandemic." Everybody was already busy, and so although USAC jumped in, and I think this was probably in May, they loosened up those rules. It might have been in April. I mean, and I applaud them for it 100%, but it was still too tight for providers to do much at all. And I think it comes down to what Libby says with regards to the hotspots. I actually applaud Starlink because they rolled out their satellite service to a school district in West Texas. And I think they're trying to prove a point. This is a way to get service to an entire area equitably, because terrain matters in broadband, and that's going to affect things like fiber and fiber availability. So the hotspots, like I said before, they can be rolled out really quickly, and I'm actually excited about satellite, although it's going to be a competitor myself. And I'm going to wind up competing with big money like that. The fact that a single product can be delivered no matter where somebody lives is important when it comes to education.
I think it's kind of interesting just to see a lot of the enterprises starting to, jump into this and trying to bring solutions to the table. I was hearing where, Land of Lakes, right? The people that make the butter, are looking at trying to use their farms and their infrastructure to set up, hotspots, right? Because they have such a presence across the Midwest in a lot of different areas. So I thought that was really cool. But to your point, Brian, it's then, then getting the service technicians and the infrastructure built around to be able to do that, is certainly a challenge, but I love the effort. And because, as we talk about a lot, it takes a village, to build broadband in a lot of these areas. But what I do like about Starlink also is that, there are some areas that really make it super difficult for any type of traditional service provider to ever support, right? So there's an absolute need for it. And I am excited about seeing it. I think we've seen, some early trials also in Washington as well on some tribal areas. So I think that's super exciting. So, I'm loving that we're starting to get more of the private sector involved in trying to solve the problem, because everyone's being affected by it, right? You're working professionals, and now you're obviously a part-time teacher. And being a part-time teacher in some situations is not very beneficial to the bread earner or obviously the student, right? You're not giving them the same kind of dedication that they need that they may normally be getting.
So there was a survey from Education Week that said 64% of American teachers and administrators said their pupils faced technology limitations. That's a huge number. What can we do? What can we do as businesses? Obviously, we have lots of representatives on this panel, but what do you, as service providers, as technology companies, as educators, what's the message? What's the message that we should be telling people, we should be talking about on other Zoom calls, on socially distanced coffee, socially distanced, happy hours? What should we be doing, or what can we be doing to help this situation?
I think one of the most basic things that's obviously coming up in the next couple of days here is voting for bills and amendments that are going to support education funding. Colorado has some of the worst public education funding in our country. And as we think about schools having an increasing amount of need for technology and just student support in a new environment, I think it's critical that we consider how we vote in ways that support access to more funding at the school level, for sure.
Okay, voting. Agree.
Get out
what
there.
else can we do?
Well, let's be clear. There's some very positive things that have come out of technology this year. So if you look at the leaps and bounds with which Zoom grew, Microsoft Teams upgraded their platform, I would contend that they've taken 4 or 5 years of development and crammed it into 2020, and we're all benefiting from that now. And in fact, we're a big Slack shop, and we've been using Teams, and I love the quality. There's still some issues with regards to dial-in and whatnot. It's still conferencing issues, but the development that's happening right now, and there's people right now working because there's so much. And this speaks to something you asked earlier, Nick, about what's this going to look like. I think in the end, employers are going to allow some of the workforce to remain working from home. It doesn't cost anything to lease a commercial space for them, to have an office, to pay for desks, to pay for phones. Everybody can be on a soft phone, and they just have to be issued a laptop and and maybe an external monitor. But the point of all that is, I think that you asked the question, what can we do? I think we need to recognize what's going to be the result of this. I think there are people right now developing other products because they see the money involved. If I'm an employer and I say it costs me X dollars a year to have an employee sit in a leased space with utilities and whatnot, I'm looking at that now. And there's a software developer, I'm certain right now, developing a software package that's going to make that much easier. And so the thing I said, let's be clear about, is I think that technology has evolved really quickly, and it's helping students, and it's helping professionals, and it will continue. And I think there's going to be a pretty large impetus. Even the virtual conference platforms that I've seen, shocking. The ability to attend the conference live, to go back and watch it. I'm not sure people are going to attend conferences as broadly in the future. So I want to point out, I think there's some positives that are coming out of this. Everybody knew up to 2019 that America had a broadband problem. Now it's been emphasized, and people are responding. And to something that Brian Hollister said, this feels a little bit like, like everybody needs to be talking about it. And I think everybody is talking about it. And in my view, this feels a little bit like electrification, where everybody's neighbors started getting together at the fence line and saying, well, why don't we build our own electrical line? And that's what Longmont's doing with their fiber. That's what a number of communities are doing and power companies are doing. And that's the right discussion. This is all the right discussion that we need to have. So my answer is, I think that that's happening now. We could try to solve the problem now, but I think that just talking about it helps that problem.
And Brian, along the same lines of the progress being made, I'd like to, I guess, make a shout out to just the school districts throughout the country. The progress they're making is just, they've just been evolving and adapting and adopting new technologies, and kind of just sharing it back among themselves to find out what is working and what's not working. One example my daughter gave me was just an app that lets you, the teacher makes it easy for a teacher to just simply teach on some topic, maybe 10 minutes. And then each student then is presented with a series of questions that they separately then answer themselves. It just gives a real quick feedback to the teacher in terms of whether or not the students are picking up on it. So it's a little more challenging. Teachers are always trying to look to see if students are understanding what they're saying. A little more challenging, especially if they don't have the video, of course. So lots of little things like that are happening, and kind of at a really accelerated pace throughout the school districts of the U.S.
I think one of the problems that we have from, working some of the smaller rural schools around the, kind of in the outskirts of Longmont and stuff, we still need to figure out how to get devices into the students' hands. Libby, touched on it, that the funding that takes place in Colorado is pretty poor. I don't know if that's a public-private partnership that needs to take place where corporations come in and help fund that, but there's got to be a way to get those devices. You can provide them with the broadband, but if they don't have the devices to access their online learning, it's kind of a moot point.
That's a great point. I think, and Brian Worthen, I think, you hit it's important to recognize the good things, right? Like there have been some amazing technology advancements. And as Dr. Dave said, like we know educators are underpaid. We know educators are underappreciated. And I think they are, moving mountains this year and doing things that, I think without them, we would be in a lot worse situation. I mean, forget broadband for a second. I mean, they've taken it amongst themselves to do more with less. And so that's, I think, something to appreciate as well. And we need to try to figure out how we can continue to help them do that.
Well, I think Worthen said it, really good in the essence that, there's actually a lot of progression happening here. I mean, I think of my own children and all of the things that they've been taught from a technical standpoint associated with communicating with their teachers. They use a program called Notes. I always think of Lotus Notes for some of us that have been around.
That's old
But,
school.
but they pass these notes back and forth, right? I mean, you kids pass notes, right? So they pass notes to the teacher, and that's how they communicate. And it's super simple, super easy. But it is absolutely fascinating to watch this evolution happening. I mean, it obviously came on wild and crazy in the beginning, but the schools have done an amazing job. I mean, it went from us figuring out day by day a good summer break that was not a break for any teacher that's been around. And they have come into this school year in our school doing an amazing job. Even my kid, he's like, yeah, I hope we never have to give up this, every other day kind of thing. He loves it. And he's totally dialed in. So I think there is a lot of really cool advancements happening. I think there's a lot of people developing some amazing things, and also just watching the impact to all of us, right? From a technical aspect, we're constantly all showing each other new things. And now it's some things that we're being taught from our kids that they're learning, that something new from school, right? And how they're having to communicate. So I actually think it's super fascinating and awesome. And there have been a lot of good things that actually have come from this. But obviously there's a lot of challenges too. But I think what we can do is exactly what Brian said, is continue to talk about this, bringing different people together from all parts of the community. And what I love about, what being in the broadband industry, it's always been an industry that's ever evolving and changing. And it's always added value. But right now it's a bipartisan topic. Everyone's for figuring out how to fix this gap, and we've never had this much attention on it, and I'm super enthusiastic about it. The conversations I've had just in the last week or two with whether it be government leaders, tribal nations, it's all the same conversation. We're all having the same conversation, no matter what walk of life, no matter what we do. Everyone's being impacted. And, at the end of the day, we're Americans, and every American deserves a connection. And we've got to continue to talk about this and make it happen. And I do believe, because of the pandemic, we're actually going to increase the momentum in closing the gap. But along the way, there's certainly going to be some other challenges that we've acknowledged, in today's, topics conversation.
And with that, obviously it's shocking, but we've actually blown by an hour already. We've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about the technology. We've talked about inequities. The amazing educators that have done wonders in helping students. The patience of mothers and fathers that have not killed each other or killed their children trying to do education at home. And the I would say the altruism of the service providers that are truly doing the work to try to make it better for all homes, and not even just in rural areas, but in the city as well. So I want to close this episode 5 with just some kind of parting thoughts from each of you. We go. Obviously, as Libby said, next week is we're at Halloween. It is a spooky time with the Skeletor in the background there, and we're also have obviously next week's big election. But thinking beyond that, this year's almost coming to an end, right? It's been a crazy 2020, and where broadband and education go in 2021. There's a lot of opportunity and a lot of glass half full things to think about. So maybe just your parting thoughts around where we go, what we do, what we can help with, and or anything you just like to share as we close out this episode. We'll start with kind of go around the clock. We'll start with Libby.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate all the support for our educational system here. And so I think, like we said, just continuing the conversation and showing appreciation for teachers, I think goes a long way right now, but also supporting our working parents who, regardless of what industry you're in, are struggling to both work from home and support their students as well. And so I think that would be my parting wish, is that we both consider educators, students, and working parents from home during this continually challenging time.
Mr. Worthen.
I actually want to talk or close with the fact that education has done a great job talking about STEM in the last few years. And I think that's opened up minds to an environment like we have today, because I've been asked in the last 2 months by legislators and also multiple community colleges about what kind of students can we prepare for you. And the fact of the matter is there's a shortage of technicians that understand routers. There's a shortage of fiber splicers. There's a shortage of construction crews. I think that this is helping, and I hope education continues this conversation, because in the past, when I was in school, the focus was on getting into the university, and I actually feel like the focus should shift a little bit to getting into trade school, because we have a need for a technical catalog of employees, and the STEM focus has really helped with that. And the fact that I've been asked by colleges to say, what programs can we put together for you? These are the same colleges that are probably cutting their hospitality programs and whatnot in response to the pandemic. And I think that's a harsh realization on their part, but also it's the new reality. And there are so many positives out of this, and it's a great problem to have, that we need a workforce to educate. And I love the idea of a public-private partnership with education.
Awesome. Dr. Dave.
Yeah, I've got I guess a close on an optimistic note. I guess it's maybe just not a big sample size, of course, but just sounds encouraging that because of the pandemic and the lockdowns and the kind of really changed everything, it sounds like in some ways it has made, we've talked the whole hour about how it's made things so difficult for teaching, but in some ways it has made it easier. And I think what my daughter observes is that, students kind of miss their friends, they miss school, and so they kind of want to be there and even the learning. And so it's kind of the classrooms have, I guess a phrase, classroom management has been easier. It's just it's kind of changed everything, and everything's new, but it's kind of optimistic that as hard as it is for the students, they're there ready to try as hard as they can.
Awesome. Mr. Pappas.
I just think as an industry, we just can't be satisfied with where we're at right now. I think we need to have innovators and the creative minds that are on this call and many other calls that continue to push the envelope and demand better services, cheaper services, smarter services, so that the customers don't have to you don't have to have a degree to set up your home network in that. So I think it's possible. I just think that we got to continue to move forward.
Awesome. And we'll close with Mr. Hollister.
Yeah, I think, we're seeing momentum build. Obviously we know broadband can bring huge economic benefits to any community. It's obviously why many of us on this call have stayed in this industry to try and drive that. And, telehealth is obviously a huge issue, and being able to get affordable or just get access to telehealth. And then now education has become, such a huge aspect in all of this too. So what I'm really hoping now that's happening is like, what else do we need to all agree to make this happen? We've got to solve this problem. And we can't stop talking about it. We've got to, get out there and vote next week for the things that are important to education, but also are going to continue to drive broadband. Don't stop talking about it. You're on a common platform with every friend, every neighbor, everyone you communicate with understands this problem and can get behind it. And to Dennis's point, we've got to solve it. There's a lot of smart people across this great country and beyond that all have the same problem. Let's make it happen. We're close, but we can't stop. It's the momentum's building. We can't stop, and let's not, don't let a good crisis go to waste.
I think Dennis said it. I'm going to cut in here. I think Dennis said it great. We got to do better, right? As a provider, we got to do better. And the point I made earlier in the conversation is, if you're not spending money with a provider that's doing better, figure out who's going to do better, right?
Yeah.
Hold
ourselves to a higher standard, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
The fact that we keep having these conversations, while it does employ a lot of us, it's honestly ridiculous. Let's stand up. Let's make it happen, people. Right? We're all on the same page for once.
And on that note, I'd like to raise a glass, since it is Beer and Broadband. Toast everybody. I want to thank the panel, Brian, Dr. Dave, Libby, Dennis, and Brian. You guys are amazing, smart people, and we thank you on behalf of Bonfire for participating in Beer and Broadband. Cheers. And
Cheers.
we look forward to the continuing episodes, and you can find us at bonfire-ec.com or on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks
Happy
again,
Halloween.
and have a great day.
Yeah.
Happy Halloween.
Halloween.